Hello, friends. Is that coming? Yes. Yeah, a little closer. Hello, good evening. Welcome. I'm so glad that y'all are here tonight. Um, I'm looking forward to sharing about the travel seminar that I went on. I am currently a student at Union Presbyterian Seminary in Charlotte, North Carolina. And so I went on this journey with my classmates, my professors, and I did do this trip for credit also. And so I'm actually really grateful for that because I got an extra level of detail with the work and assignments that I had to do alongside of the trip as well. And so this was 9 days and 9 cities on a bus, which was quite a lot. It was quite a lot, and there were about 40 or so of us, but we got to hit a lot of spaces, a lot of spots. We got to meet a lot of people and hear their stories, and that's part of what I want to do tonight is share some of the stories that I heard with you all. So in our 9 days, these are all of the cities we hit: Atlanta, Birmingham, Selma, Montgomery, New Orleans, Angola, Jackson, Memphis, and Nashville. Um, some of those a day or two there, and some we hit like 3 cities in a day at one point too. So really all over and all of the places, and lots of good sights, lots of good stories. This is my group that I traveled with. We were quite a large group and quite a diverse group that came from all over the country. That's one of the things that I love about my school and a distance program is that I'm not the only crazy person not in Charlotte that goes to Charlotte once a month when I could go somewhere closer to home. Excuse me. And so I have I'm not going to go through like the trip of like we did this and went to this place and this place and this place specifically, but I want to share some of the stories that stood out, some of the things that stuck with me. One of the blessings of taking this for credit is that we had to journal every day of the trip, and so I was reading back through some of my journals today, getting ready, and re-envisioning myself in those spots and those places. This is from the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta. It's the first thing you see as soon as you walk in. We got there right around sunset, and so it was really lit beautifully. Um, we went to the National Civil Rights Museum in every single city that we went to. So it was really interesting to see the same museum but different in so many places, and what their local spin was, or not spin, but what their local focus was, what stories they had that were theirs specifically to share. And what really stood out to me at this museum was the art. And there were a lot of quilts, and I love the stories that quilts tell throughout history, and I'd love to share those photos another time too. We also got to meet real people who lived and fought through the civil rights movement. And so in the middle here, you can see her in with the red on. This is Miss Annie Pearl Avery. And we got to meet Miss Annie in Selma right before we crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And she was the only person arrested during one of the attempts to cross the bridge, because Bloody Sunday was only one of the days. There were multiple days and multiple attempts to march across the bridge in Selma. And so Miss Annie told us her story of that day, how she was trying to be a part of the group, but also ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time and was alone when a group of white police officers found her. And she knew that in order to make it to her group and to her people, she had to scream and yell and fight and make her presence known. Because if no one knew where she was, they could take her and do whatever they like with her. And she was arrested, but she made it out, and she continued to fight, and she worked with an organization called SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, which is one of the organizations that came out of the civil rights movement. And we honestly, like for an hour, I think we just got to stand and listen to her story and to everything we had to share. And this is one of my professors, Dr. Sadler. And at the end of her sharing, Dr. Sadler said, so how long did you work with SNCC? And she said, what do you mean did? I'm still doing it. She said, I was arrested 3 years ago. It's my most recent, and I'm not done. And until I am not on this earth anymore, I am not done fighting. And this is the National Voting Rights Museum and Institute, which is right on the other side of the bridge in Selma. And Selma, like many of the cities we visited, is actually, to this day, still a very depressed area. They don't get tourists who come to see the bridge, who come to see the museum, to come learn and hear their stories. And so Annie and a couple of other people started this museum. I think they opened like 2 or 3 years ago. And you can see that the passion and love that they have made, and that they want their stories to live. They want to tell them, and they want people to come now and come see them now and hear them now. I don't know if he's in that photo, but our tour guide at the museum was also quite a personality. He was very fun. And he wasn't old enough to be involved in the civil rights movement at the time. I think he said he was born in the 60s. But he had plenty of stories to share. And to quote him, because I'm a gay Black pastor, of course I have stories to share. And so he also experienced similar things to Miss Annie, but still to this day and in different ways as well. And I remember, and I have in my journal from that day, hearing her story, seeing everyone with their phones out, but not, everyone has their phones out, but we recognize the value in capturing this, and what stories aren't being captured, or what stories do we need to be more intentional about capturing. Because Miss Annie is just a normal person who has been living her normal everyday life, aside from the arrests and the activism she still does. But she's not a big national household name that we know all of these stories, but she's still got a lot to share. And so are we taking the time to sit and listen? And are we retelling them and sharing them and passing them on? After we walked through the museum, we actually had a time of worship and communion together, and then walked across the bridge at sunset arm in arm with a partner, which was really a powerful time and a powerful moment. And extra special and powerful is that there were some other people who came to the museum that day. They don't often get visitors, and they joined us, and they recognized that we were a Christian group, and they said, can we come with you? Can we worship with you? Can we have communion with you? And we actually saw them the next day in the next city we went to, so they were on a similar trip. This is Hezekiah Watson, and we got to meet him in Jackson, I believe. And he was the youngest freedom rider. And he came again to tell us his story. And we got to sit and listen and be in his presence and hear his story of what it was like to be the youngest freedom rider. He was arrested at 14. And he was trying to find the Freedom Riders. He had not actually found the group yet. He knew he needed to go to the bus station. And he and his friend went to the bus station. And they were looking, and they were like, there should be people here. We know that this is happening today. We can't find them anywhere. And they poked their head in the whites only section, and his friend pushed him in. And he was arrested for being in the whites only section of the bus station. He wasn't able to explain his story or what happened. His friend disappeared. He never talked to him again after that day. And he actually was arrested, put in a paddy wagon, and taken to death row at 14. And sat on death row for weeks and weeks and weeks. And no one told his mother where he was, because only that friend knew what happened. And it got to the point that the local officials, and even up to the state level, knew that they weren't supposed to have him, knew that he was a child and that he did not deserve to be on death row. And word got to the president. And the president said, I hear you have a minor on death row. Is that true? And they're like, oh, no. And someone else came and said, if the president finds out that you lied to them, what is going to happen from that? And that is how Hezekiah was eventually released. And again, continuing his fight. And at the museum in Jackson, they have freedom riders who still come in and tell their stories and host times to be with people and share what their experience was. Hezekiah wrote a book. I have a copy of his book, and I got to have him sign it. I was lamenting earlier to Laura that I got a photo with him, but it's on someone else's phone, and they never sent it to me. But again, these stories that we need to capture and know, because also they're important, but the visceral reaction we have to them is what we can't lose about not just this era of history, but our current era of history too. And the power in those stories as well. This is from the Lynching Museum by the Equal Justice Initiative. And it's hard to see if this is a quote from Martin Luther King Jr. True peace is not merely the absence of tension, it is the presence of justice. Um, and each of these blocks is a county in the US where recorded lynchings have occurred. And on these blocks at the top is the name of the county and the lists of names and dates of when they were lynched. And so those are all individual counties. And actually, when you come to the museum, I have a photo at the end. This is up on a hill. And you walk up the hill, and there are monuments and sculptures and plaques to read. And you start level with each of these blocks. And as you walk around, you can see this is slanted. You come down until you're standing under them. And to see them, you have to look up. And as a part, one of the things the Equal Justice Initiative has done is there are 2 existing copies of each of these. There's all of these that are hanging here, and there are exact replicas. And they are encouraging the communities with their names on these blocks to name and claim them and to make a monument there as well. And so you can reach out to EJI and say, I am in this town and we would like to set it up, and they will send you the replica so that you can also honor and memorialize those in your area too. There were, I think, 2 in Pennsylvania of these. They're obviously the majority from the South, but there were 2 in Pennsylvania. One still at the museum and yet to be claimed, and one that has been claimed by its community also. We also had the privilege of visiting Medgar and Marilee Evers' home. And typically on this trip, there's no one there and we just get to walk outside and see, but it was staffed that day. We got to go inside and we got to hear from the park ranger who works there. Part of our trip, for those of us doing it for credit, is we each had a presentation to do every day about what we were going to see. And so we started with our presentation in the driveway where the bloodstains still are from where Medgar was assassinated. And we heard our presentation, and then we ended by singing one of the hymns that was sung at his funeral. And the park ranger had disappeared, and we're like, oh, I guess we can't go inside. We couldn't find him. And we found him, and he said it's rare that there are visitors, and it's rare that there are visitors who know where they are and what they're experiencing. And he needed to step away because it had touched him, and he hadn't sung that hymn in a very long time. And the family still visits. They still come to visit their home, and they still come to see the park. But really, it's a house in a neighborhood. All of the houses around it, people still live in. There's a park down the street. There was a stray cat running around that we were petting as we were there. And all the houses around it look exactly like it and have families that still live there every single day. And so it's memorialized, but it's not a museum that you go to in a city, or it's not just this house with everything around it. It's still surrounded by people living their everyday lives. And the home is set up as it was when the Evers family lived there. And so you can walk through, and they've even got, you can open the fridge and see what they might have had in the fridge, and the china in the cabinets, and the quilts on the bed. And what struck me the most was coming into the children's bedrooms and seeing the dolls on the bed. When Medgar was assassinated, his family was home. Um, and as a public figure, he and his family were aware of the potential for violence and aware of the danger that they lived in every day. And so he had taught his kids to go hide in the bathroom because they had a cast iron tub. To go hide in the tub and hide in the bathroom, that's your safe place. And they stayed up that night to hear his speech. And so normally they would have been asleep and in their bedroom. And actually, this is the children's bedroom right here. This spot right here is where he was assassinated. Um, and so they were awake to watch and hear him. But that also means that they were awake and home when he came home. Um, and across the street, you can still see the exact bush that the gunman hid in. And down the road, they've made a community garden in honor of the family that it was winter, so there wasn't much there for us to see, but that helps feed the community because, again, it's still a very depressed area and a product of, like, because it was such a contentious place, because it was a Black community, because it was during the Civil Rights Movement, it never had its chance to become more. I was looking at some of the houses around, and the houses in that neighborhood that were for sale were averaged about $30,000 to buy the homes there. And they have water issues there akin to Flint that aren't well known. But we had a local with us who, when we sat down to eat, said, "Don't drink the water." So these communities are still suffering and still living the effects every day of the civil rights movement. It is not something that ended or is over. We also had the opportunity to visit a plantation, and not a plantation for weddings and events, but a plantation that is set up to be a historical site, to come learn about what it was actually like on a plantation. And this was the Whitney Plantation in Angola, Louisiana. And they really focus on the children of the plantation as well, because they're often forgotten. And so there are statues all around of children who they know lived there. Um, and actually, our access, like our pass that we got when we came, we each had a tag with a different Whitney Plantation child on it. Um, and I bought a book of all of them and their stories and their photos, but they are all around all around the plantation. And it was, in a way, a lot of what I expected from a plantation. But what struck me were the things that the family did to show their wealth. And that manifested in a number of ways. One is the front of the house was painted to look like marble, because anyone can buy marble, but not everyone can fly someone in from Italy to paint the front of their house to look like marble. And so it was not a status symbol to have a marble home, it was a status symbol to have a painted marble home. And this family spent less than 50% of the year actually in this home. They had other homes. This is a frog pond that was in front of the house. And at one point, the river moved, and they couldn't hear the frogs from the river anymore. And so they made frog ponds and brought them in so that you could hear the frogs because they were too far from the water now. And had me thinking of the things, even not on that grand scale, but the ways that we every day too are involved in injustice with our consumerism, and whether we know it or not, how we're complicit in those systems. And are we being conscious consumers? Are we thinking about the people who are affected specifically by our larger and maybe sillier purchases, like painted marble wood or a frog pond in our front yard? But also in other ways too. How is our consumerism affecting people today as well? The museum also had, or the plantation had a section with all of the names of all the recorded names of the enslaved people who were there. And they had a specific garden within that memorial just of the children. that told their stories and had their names, and it listed the songs that they sang and their experiences. Um, and especially as someone who cares deeply about children, that was very touching and moving, because those aren't stories that we often hear as well, and what their life was like too. We ended our trip with a workshop, um, with about mass incarceration. So we spent 8 days going through learning about the civil rights era, learning about the history, and then we spent our last day talking about the here and now and mass incarceration in the US and how that is modern day slavery and what that looks like. And our workshop actually was led by a handful of individuals who had previously been incarcerated and were now sharing their stories and working for justice in the future. And most of them were artists. And so they shared their art with us that was beautiful and touching in a number of ways. Um, this was made in 2016. This, the artist shared, is a Confederate monument in his neighborhood that he noticed all of the black kids playing around, not knowing what they were playing, but just having fun, playing at the foot of a Confederate monument. There was a whole series on Black Joy, beautiful, gorgeous art, and we all were like, can we buy it? Can we buy it? Can we buy it? He's not selling right now, unfortunately. um, Absolutely gorgeous, and you can't tell from the photo, but um, it's actual fabric that he went to Africa and purchased at various countries in Africa, and he can tell you where every piece came from and what story goes with each piece. Absolutely gorgeous, and of a courtroom and the quote unquote justice, especially for young black boys. The group that we worked with that came to do our workshop also now does work for actual restorative justice and reforming communities in that way. And so the man who started the organization called Rafa House, he was a police officer. He's a black man and was a police officer and thought that becoming a police officer, he would be able to help his community. And then he became a police officer, and then he learned that that's not actually what police officers do. And he wanted to do something about that and do something differently. Um, and so in their restorative justice work, they work with both victims and families to find alternatives to traditional prison, and also to bring restoration between them. And so one of the stories they shared was of a 13-year-old boy who, on a joyride in a stolen car, had hit someone else and killed them. And through that process, the family lost a husband and a father and someone very dear to them, but they also recognized that this was a young child and that there's more to his story than he just got in a car and killed someone. And so, in lieu of jail time, they worked with the DA and the prosecutor's office and the families together, and they both spent a year in therapy separate from each other, the child and his family and the affected family. And when the family was ready, when they voiced that they were ready, and when the child and his family voiced that they were ready, they came together and had a meeting together to talk about it together and to both voice how they were affected and what their life has been like since then and what they want life to be moving forward. Um, and what struck me the most and what they really um, emphasized with us too is so often when something goes wrong, when someone gets in trouble, we say, "What did you do?" That's the immediate response. Even a small thing, a child is crying, "What did you do? What did you do?" When we should be saying, "What happened? What happened?" And so for this boy, he left to go to school one morning, and he was waiting at the bus stop, and there was a woman at the bus stop crying, and he said, "What's wrong? How can I help you? What's wrong?" and she just needed $80. I just need $80. I just need $80. And he was like, well, I have $80. Here you go. And she said, okay, I'll give you my car. That's how much I need your $80. And he was like, cool, car, like big kid, grown-ups and like cool kids drive cars. I'll take it. And so he wanted to help her. And then he got to drive a car to school at 13. How cool is that? He'd never driven a car before. And he was swerving to miss someone, and in his swerve hit someone else, and did not set out to harm anyone that day, and was just trying to get to school because earlier he was trying to help someone else who was having a hard time. And then further that of, well, where does a 13-year-old get $80 from? What is he doing in his neighborhood? Why does he have to go and get that money for himself and his family? What other outside factors are affecting people? And we often default to what did you do? You're bad and wrong, and that's why you committed this crime. But everyone who we got to hear from on this day had a story of what happened. Of, I was in an abusive relationship, and he just told me to drive him somewhere, and I did, not knowing where he was taking me, and now I'm an accomplice. I just needed to feed my family. And that there are stories behind all of these things, and they're not people intentionally trying to commit crimes, but people trying to live their day-to-day lives under the oppression and injustice that we have created in our society. And thus we have mass incarceration, modern day slavery, also because of the work that we're able to have inmates do at very low rates as well. And the whole trip was powerful, but especially powerful way to end, and to think about, what do I do next? Where do I go from here? What am I being called to be a part of? Because this is not something that we just go home and say, I had this trip and it was great. But a real thing that affects our lives and others' lives as well. And that we shouldn't be able to just walk away and do nothing. Nope, go back. Sorry. This is another piece of art from the first museum that I shared there. It actually is their donor wall, but it's still gorgeous. And so I have questions for us to discuss as well, to lead us into discussion, because one of the things about this trip, about learning about history and the civil rights movement, and that I carried with me too, is as we visited all these sites and we're hearing about all these places and things, and we know that the civil rights movement was a movement for Black people in America. What I wasn't seeing a lot of or hearing about were allies who came alongside, who also tried to be agents for justice. If I was hearing about white people, it was not good. And this isn't our story, and it shouldn't have been everywhere that I went. There were stories about white people too, because it's not. But if the only story being shared and told is the negative, to me, the absence of a good story answered my question of, in what ways was the white church positively engaged and an ally and helping advance the movement and using their privilege. Which led me to wonder today of, what are we doing today? How are we engaged today? And are we on the right side of history today? And what can we do, especially in a place where we have privilege, to be allies, to make space for other voices, not to platform ourselves, but also silence and inaction is complicit. And so sort of that's kind of where I want to lead. Um, and so I have a handful of questions that I think we can spend some time discussing in our tables and then come back together as a larger group. I think that will be a little bit better. So, where do you see parallels between the civil rights era and immigration justice and other injustices today? What feels familiar in patterns of either resistance or denial? What does faithful solidarity look like in our local context? What is one way our church could move from awareness to action? What risks might faithfulness require of us? And who is already doing this work that we can join or support? I recognize that was not nearly enough time. uh, but I want to have time to share with the whole, if you have would like to share with the whole from your tables as well. I have a second minute. Anyone? I'll call on. No, I won't call on you. I'm kidding. I do that to kids. I won't do that to you.
For the question about what is one way your church making for awareness action, we were just saying that, like, even bringing kids here, right? Like, so kids come and they hear children's messages where they hear we're all children of God, right? And no matter what your color, no matter what your skin looks like, we are all God's children. We are all loved. We are all worthy of love. And, maybe that message didn't exist a couple decades ago. So, like, it's sometimes the swing of the pendulum is real slow, but it makes progress because we're commenting on how like the kids don't really see it, right? Like they don't see those differences in such a way that requires them to call out differences like some of us might as we get older or as our parents or grandparents or whatever might have done. Um, so, things like making sure we're here to get to the children, help them do better than we do is a big thing.
And you can be a part of that by volunteering with Children's and Family Ministries. I have openings. No, thank you. That made me think. I almost put it in a photo of all of the museums had gift shops, but all of their gift shops were um, things made by minority creators and small businesses, which was really wonderful and special. Like I got these bracelets when we were at the plantation, and they were made by women in Ghana. I got my sister from some soaps made by a woman with Down syndrome who has a small business. Like it was all really cool things like that. And so someone um, gave me this pin. What else?
We didn't get to finish the story over here about, and it does relate to children. I think I did not grow up, I grew up in Buffalo, and we were integrated from day one. I didn't know, and sometimes I didn't know if I was a minority or majority, and I didn't know there was enough diversity. And I don't know if that's where your experience was when you were talking about the schools, but
I don't think children see the differences as much as adults do. And that's absolutely no disrespect to my parents who, in a predominantly white neighborhood within this school district, they sold their home to African American families. And that's the first time I realized something wasn't quite right because our neighbors were not happy. Mm. I didn't understand, you know. And that was probably since I was elementary school. But I think kids, if they're exposed to diversity, it's all they know. It's not all of a sudden this new kid on the block. Mm-hmm.
A lot of my classmates are Southern and are from North or South Carolina. Um, and a lot of the people on the trip are Southern. And actually, like, even the people on the trip with us, there were a handful of people who remember living through the civil rights movement. And that's one of the things I love about my school is truly like all the diversity amongst us as students. And so hearing their stories and whatnot too. But a lot of them were like, oh yeah, you're the Northerner girl, you're the Northerner, you're the Northerner. And so like, you wouldn't know, you wouldn't know. And it was an interesting spot to be in because I had learned pretty much everything that we read and saw in the museums, and a lot of the people with me had not. But I'm from here. I grew up in a rural small town that was white, and my family and my classmates and the people that I grew up around are racist. And like I dated a boy that had a Confederate flag hanging from his truck in high school. Um, so like I always joke, like people in my hometown don't, not joke, it's not, but they don't remember that we live above the Mason-Dixon line. Um, and so that was just like an interesting spot to be in of like, I've heard and known these stories. And obviously from my Southern classmates don't have the same level of stories of prejudice and racism as they have, but have in ways experienced and had to move on and grow out of that also. And what did that for me was being raised in the church to know and love Jesus and do the work that Jesus did. Yeah. Anything else? Yeah.
So a related question. I just want to thank you for bringing awareness to this topic. I grew up in Alabama, Montgomery, in the summer.
Yeah.
Atlanta area was wonderful in many different ways and not in other ways. And recently spent a lot of my life in Oklahoma. So I've got some context. And I just think that this is amazing that you're sharing this. My family's lived up here for the last 5 years, and I haven't seen this type of intention before in this area. And so I'm very grateful to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
I'm sorry, you haven't seen what?
This sort of intention.
Intention.
Mm-hmm. I know I've been here almost 5 years now. I'm not a Westminster outsider, but I am a Westminster outsider because I didn't grow up here. And I was just talking to a new family today, getting ready for their first visit. And I tell everyone that this is a special place. And this is a place where we're talking about the things and doing the things. And that's part of what I love about this place so much and love being here. It's what drew me here. But I was actually at the point of, if I can't do and be this in the church, then I'm done with the church. And I'm glad I found you all, and very grateful for that. And so another, like, what do we do? What comes out of this is that Laura Bentley and I want to lead a similar trip for Westminster. And we're thinking about trying to organize a civil rights pilgrimage sometime in the fall, probably, for people to go on. It won't be as intense as in like 9 days on a bus going to 9 different cities and a new hotel every night, and it won't be to that quite to that level. We're still working out the details, but this is an interest form if you're interested in that, and or if you're interested in ongoing anti-racism work through and with Westminster. And some of that, like, we have an idea of what that looks like, and some of that we have space to form what that looks like. One of the things that looks like is the PCUSA currently requires congregations to make an anti-racism policy. And so we need to do that. We need to put a group together with the staff to do that and get that happening. And how we can continue work beyond that and actual activism and justice work as well, because that's our foundation here. Dr. Galbraith was in Selma. He went down there. He stood up for, and so the foundation of this congregation is social justice work, because the foundation of this congregation is the gospel. And that is what the gospel calls us to do. So if you are interested in any of that, if you want to fill that out or let Bentley or I know so that we can work on that running list, and we will get details out as we have them for that. Did you have? Oh.
So yes, you brought up Reverend Galbraith, but we also have members in the church who were activists in the 1960s. I think about Charlotte Nathaniel, people who actually trained in passive resistance, and they have fascinating stories. And so for people my age and older, it's thrilling to see this type of program forming. So thank you very much.
Yeah.
I'm assuming everybody knows Dr. Galbraith's story and relationship to Selma.
I bet they don't.
I bet not.
We'd love to hear yours.
No, I think we should share.
You were on staff at the time, were you?
Well, Dr. King invited our clergy from all walks of life, all places, all sections, to come and join him. And so John Galbraith went to this session and said, I feel like I need to go. I'm sorry. Good point. Yeah, he started his congregation by knocking on doors when I was Wyoming. Before it was a booming summer of different farms. He came back from the war, from the Second World War, and from his chaplain, and began knocking on doors. He started by Shadyside Church. And so John went to the session and said he felt like he needed to go, and said, please go. And he went to the presbytery, and the presbytery also supported him and sent 2 other pastors. So there were 3 from Pittsburgh who went. And then John came back, and we lost about 200 members. And I was thinking about that one, what risks might faithfulness require? So part of your risk was to keep his job in your previous church, and part of John's risk was how bad is the fallout going, because racism is real. And I think that foundation evidences itself in a lot of ways. Like I was saying, tell her about the Grace Group. We, for 5 years, were a part of an interracial book study where we studied books on racism and race, Presbyterian Church and Fellowship. And until the COVID came, we would go out there every other week to talk about these books and race. And so the relationships that we built during those 5 years were really very, very important.
And they told us that the reason it was helpful to them was so that we can understand what their experience has been. And unfortunately, COVID really was hard. We were getting to a point where we needed to be talking about action, I think, but we didn't really know how to go about that. And then COVID came, so we've been on Zoom. And that was hard for a lot of people from Grace, so it kind of went away. We had dinner with one another here last May. And then, but we haven't met since.
I think there is, I just got, sorry, I
You're
just
fine.
got an email from Emily today. They're doing something at Grace. Emily, the church. Yeah, that's just starting meals. They're trying to gather volunteers to either in their own homes or maybe here make meals. And do you want to do it together? So there is some connection. I don't know how that started. I just got that email and bumped into her and said, oh, I'd love to. You need dessert or chicken or whatever.
I guess we don't have enough communication around here.
That's good. It's in the bulletin and the Friday email this week. I remember proofing it, so you'll see. Yeah, yeah. Yes.
When I was younger, took an anti-war stance. I was a conscientious objector. I worked for nearly 3 years with mentally ill state prisoners.
Mm.
I had to work in a job that was in the national health, safety, or interest. And years later, when I was a pastor, I was participated in a participated in a study trip to the Soviet Union in which we tried to understand more about the people, the country, and the religion, and especially the Orthodox Church, which was such a different animal for most of us in the Protestant tradition. And it was a time of reaching out across the barriers of the Cold War and saying to other Christians on the other side of that barrier, we are still Christians and we still belong together. That was in the 80s. And then later in the 90s and in 2000s, I was an overseas missionary in the Czech and Slovak republics for about a total of about 16 years, trying to in some ways trying to help the churches recover from the oppression they had been subjected to during the communist era.
Thank you.
I'll put in a shameless plug for the Sunday morning seminars. They deal a lot with civil rights, and we have professors come in from the Pittsburgh Theological Seminary that give incredible talks. And one series that I particularly remember is the basis for a lot of action back in the, I'm going to call it the 60s, but it really started in the 30s, 40s, 50s, was church-based.
So my final paper for this class is on the trip. I did a presentation about the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and SNCC. And so my final paper is about that, but is not just a report of like, and here's what they did and why, but what does this look like for us today? What does this mean for us today? How can we be continuing work like this, et cetera? And what I have been thinking and stewing about too is that I'm a young millennial, so I like social media, but that does have its downsides, and one of those that we think we're connected to each other in ways that we're not. And my worry is because of that we will struggle to organize at the same levels that the SCLC and SNCC did. And how do we still do that, and what does that look like? And I know we can look at Minneapolis and they are organized there, but they organized after the fact because they had to, and it's still local. But SCLC and SNCC were larger than their communities. And so what exists that we can get involved with, how can we be a part of it in that way? Because we're going to need to. And we can't just think like, well, we're all connected anyways, or look, they're doing it. And I know that that's for everyone. And so the wondering is how do we communicate that? How do we get that across? And how do we, because the larger organization, I think, is really, it was essential. And SCLC and SNCC served different purposes and had different methods, but was pretty essential to the movement. And if we're going to make it through this, we're going to need to do the same. So then the church has got to be a part of that.
I think we're starting around third base and head for home. So, I want to put a commercial in for Westminster Church because I think one of the aspects in this church that I've seen today after a few decades here is the individualization of our society is working its way into this congregation. And it is not encouraging engagement of our congregation. That to me is a critical path, even as important as bringing new young families to this church. Every bit as important because we have people who are older, who are closer to the end of their lives, honestly. They're going to get cracking. They're going to start from criminal profiles. And our church needs that. So first of all, I don't want anyone here to say this is the only social issue that this church is interested in, or even potentially much more greatly engaged. But it is up to us to reach out and find some folks and, oh, by the way, hey, I'm working on this thing. Recognize that it's not just anti-racism that might instill enthusiasm in someone else. It could be a whole lot of other issues that we deal with. And I think there's a real amount of history, particularly in the area of interracial relationships, that you will be thrilled about when you become engaged in this particular pursuit and start to learn about the people, the churches that we have found, the relationships with the Black church that we continue on a low-key basis to maintain. We had an intern here for 2 years at least, who became the head pastor at the Grace Church, which is the first Black church west of the Alleghenies. 1823, I think, is the date on that one. So we've got a lot of stuff that we can do. It's not just racism, it's a bunch of other things. And we have such potential, such unrealized potential, that I had to give you a commercial.
Thank you, because that's a commercial again, the interest form. It has the two options, and you can select both if you're interested in the trip and being involved in further work. And we'll say, I believe it says like further anti-racism work. It should say further social justice work. We'll figure out a little like what specifically that might look like or what more that means. But yeah.
That was Dr. King's journey.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we started with race and ended up being everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you all very much. I really appreciate your time and your sharing.